with the communication satellite released by the Challenger, but at least part of it's been cleared up. I'm Lyda Snow. ABC's Irv Chapman is at Mission Control in Houston and is on the line with us now. Irv, what can you tell us about the communication satellite?
The satellite itself seems to be functioning well, Lyda, deploying its radio relay antennas and its solar energy panels and sending its signals down to Earth. The second stage of the rocket that was supposed to put the satellite in a circular orbit apparently burned out too soon, so the satellite is in an egg-shaped orbit and not as high as it should be. Technicians here in Houston think they can make a substantial orbit correction with the satellite's own maneuvering system to make it usable as planned. The 4 Challenger astronauts were informed of the problem by a teletype message sent overnight and an update from Mission Control when they awoke. They wanted and received assurance nothing they did in launching the satellite last night contributed to the problem. The launch seemed flawless, as is everything else Challenger has done so far, Lyda.
Thank you, Irv. That's Irv Chapman at Mission Control. More news coming up.
NASA's delivery didn't quite make it to the right address in space, but the space shuttle itself is performing like a charm in its inaugural flight. There were no cabin alarms overnight, and the crew, up for about an hour now, feels just great. There's been no need for a medical briefing, which means the crew is beating the space sickness odds. Usually half the shuttle crews experience the feeling. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
The orbit that we end up in will determine how much service availability or what kind of an operation we will be able to maintain with Tigris.
Tigris may have traveled erratically, but Shuttle Challenger is performing like a charm. The crew is feeling great, no evidence of space sickness. Mission Specialist Story Musgrave reported the crew is feeling just fine. Musgrave appears to be Mr. Energy. He didn't feel like sleeping last night, so instead he played with his spacesuit. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
The race is on to approve parimutuel betting. KTRH Houston.
CBS News. This is Rob Armstrong. A major disaster has been averted, at least for the time being, with the huge $100 million tracking satellite launched last night from the Space Shuttle Challenger. The satellite tumbled out of control for a time, but has now been stabilized, albeit in an abnormal orbit. Scientists say it will be a while before they can determine exactly what orbit can be achieved by the satellite. Otherwise, the Space Shuttle Challenger and its crew are performing well in day 2 of a planned 5-day mission.
The satellite is now stabilized, working just fine, but it's in the wrong orbit. NASA still can't figure out why the tracking and data relay satellite's booster didn't kick it into the geosynchronous orbit where it's supposed to be. Instead, at its closest point, it is at least 3,000 miles off. Technicians hope to correct that with the small engines that are on the side of the satellite. No one knows what happened to the booster because for some reason it lost contact with the Earth during its firing early this morning. But all is well aboard the Challenger itself. The astronauts just beamed back some live TV pictures. They've even paused to look down at Houston's murky weather this afternoon.
Yeah, it's a little cloudy down there today, Brian. You getting any rain? Stand by. I haven't looked out the window in several hours. I'll have to check. Oh, okay. And I hear that it is drizzly outside. Well, looks like it ought to be.
And indeed it is down here. An announcement about the troubled satellite is expected later this evening, but at best, the technicians say they can only bring it close to a geosynchronous orbit, leaving that satellite only partially functional. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Muller, KTRH News. Its huge antennae have unfurled. It's working just fine this afternoon, but it's more than 3,000 miles off course. 6 hours after it eased out of the Challenger, the tracking and data relay satellite's booster fired up to kick it into a geosynchronous orbit. But right in the middle of that engine burn, the booster lost touch with the Earth. A few hours later, technicians found the bird in an orbit much lower than planned. Satellite Director Robert Aller thinks that the craft has enough fuel in its own small engines to at least bring it close to that geosynchronous orbit.
I would say that this is this whole situation the past night reminds me certainly that this business we're in is man and machines,
This satellite and two others to be launched on later shuttle flights were designed as a network, relaying, among other signals, communications for future flights of the space shuttle. But today's problems could cause trouble for that network, and that could cause trouble for the European Space Lab mission scheduled for September. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Muller, KTRH News.
And that European Space Laboratory that's facing possible doubts in the future will be the subject of KTRH's Tuesday night extended report tonight at 10 o'clock.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening. I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. The white space today was the fate of the $100 million satellite that Challenger launched late last night. Judy Muller has the latest on that.
Experts tracking the TDRS satellite are still trying to work out a plan to boost that 2.5-ton craft into its proper orbit. Plans now call for using the thrusters and hydrazine fuel aboard to maneuver the TDRS up to geosynchronous orbit. And officials say they are optimistic that approach will salvage the mission, which was threatened when the satellite's rocket malfunctioned this morning. Right now, the satellite is following a sort of egg-shaped path between 14,000 and 22,000 miles above the Earth. If it stays there, the TDRS could function only some of the time. Meanwhile, the four-man crew aboard the Shuttle Challenger is having a routine day conducting scientific and medical experiments. According to the flight director, mission specialist Story Musgrave is already looking forward to the spacewalk on Thursday.
He elected to get a little bit ahead and did some checkout on the spacesuit. Story has a real personal attachment to these spacesuits. He really wants to do the EVA on flight day 4.
The spacewalk, or EVA as it's called, is seen as one of the major missions of this trip. Judy Muller, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
The Wall Street Report when The World Tonight returns.
Communication satellite, the Challenger astronauts launched from their craft last night and early today, is urgently needed for defense purposes and future shuttle missions. So when the satellite began a misshape in orbit, it kind of shook up the folks at NASA.
This morning, everybody felt that we had a patient that was dying on the table. And just a few hours later, we were all feeling like that patient was restored to life and up playing basketball. So we felt, after a period of time, that this drama really had a very happy ending. And the key point is that nobody gave up throughout this entire effort.
General James Abramson at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Now officials are working out details on how to make the course corrections that'll send the satellite into its proper orbit. The decision could take days. Meanwhile, the Challenger is coasting along with no problems to report, and the astronauts are working on other scientific experiments. More news coming up.
NBC News, I'm Ann Taylor.
That trouble developed and how NASA intends to rectify the problem in this live report from KTRH's Doug Miller at the Johnson Space Center.
The satellite is doing just fine. Unfortunately, it's in the wrong orbit, about 3,000 miles off course. No one is sure how it happened, but NASA has a pretty good idea when it happened. It all began around 5 this morning. The tracking and data relay satellite was on its own, coasting away from the shuttle right on schedule, as it had been doing for about 6 hours. The big booster attached to the satellite fired up its second stage right on schedule. Lost contact with the Earth. Ground trackers at NASA, like Ed Skywalker, their spacecraft was lost.
We discovered that we had lost telemetry. One of the only things that was gone was the command separation, essentially in the blind.
For 3 hours, NASA couldn't find its satellite. Well, finally, around 8 this morning, there it was. The booster had separated on command, but the satellite was tumbling around in an orbit that was at least 3,000 miles lower than it was supposed to be. The ground controllers stopped the tumble on a small movement. And there she sits tonight, not in the geosynchronous orbit that keeps technicians probably can fire up those tiny satellite to push it into the proper orbit.
Orbital adjustments for the satellite's hydrazine thruster system is expected to begin within 24 to 48 hours.
Now that would leave the satellite with a greatly diminished supply of fuel, less gas to keep it flying right even if it can reach the proper orbit. That's probably going to reduce its life in space. NASA and the Air Force have appointed a board of inquiry to look into that problem. The decision is expected tomorrow evening on when and how technicians will try to save that expensive satellite. And it will be a crucial decision. If they can't salvage the bird, today's entire snafu set back a tight timeline for the shuttle's future. We'll have a longer report on that coming up later on here in the Night Report. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Muller, KTRH News. Houston.
Okay, not too bad for tonight into tomorrow. We have some dry...
CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood. The Vulcan satellite into its higher stationary orbit so it can carry out the functions for which it was intended. While the launching from the Challenger space shuttle went like clockwork on Monday night, several hours later, a booster rocket malfunctioned, and the satellite is now in a much lower orbit where its capabilities are extremely limited.
President Reagan travels to Pittsburgh to talk about unemployment. French officials say there's a surplus of Soviet spies in that country. Good morning, this is Reid Collins with the CBS World News Roundup. Are sleeping now, but a lot of people in Houston are not. Among them, Judy Muller.
As the astronauts sleep aboard the orbiting Challenger, experts here on the ground are still working on a plan to boost that renegade TDRS satellite into its proper orbit, some 22,300 miles above the Earth. The problem developed yesterday after the satellite was deployed from the Challenger. The 40-second firing of an attached booster rocket ended about 20 seconds too soon. That left the satellite in a sort of egg-shaped orbit between 14,000 and 22,000 miles high. Today, those IUS rocket and satellite experts know just about as much as they did yesterday when they gave this explanation for what went wrong.
As far as what happened, we will have an investigation board jointly between NASA and the Air Force to answer that question, and we don't have an answer right at this moment as to what happened, except that something obviously off-nominal happened and we ended up in the wrong orbit.
They hope to use the hydrazine fuel and 24 thrusters on the satellite to nudge it into its proper orbit, something that could take weeks. Judy Muller, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
CBS News, this is Reid Collins. President astronauts were awakened to a suggestive love song this morning, April Stevens' rendition of Teach Me Tiger. The capsule communicator, Mary Cleve, asked if they received it, and they replied loud and clear. Tomorrow, Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson are to try a spacewalk into the cargo bay of Challenger. On Wall Street... CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards.
Astronauts have asked to talk to their doctor at Mission Control. That request is the first indication that anyone on board the space shuttle is having health troubles on this mission. KTRH's Doug Miller has this live report from the Johnson Space Center.
A medical conference came from Commander Paul Weitz. Now, that could mean he's having trouble with space sickness, but we won't know for sure because NASA's adopted a new policy making those conferences a secret between doctor and astronaut. But Weitz is not one of the astronauts scheduled to walk in space tomorrow afternoon. Story Musgrave has jumped way ahead of schedule in his preparations for the spacewalk, checking out the suit that he himself helped design. Meanwhile, Mission Control told the astronauts this afternoon that technicians on the ground think they can save the shuttle's wayward satellite.
They think they have enough propellant to boost it to a proper orbit and to conduct operations throughout the planned 10-year life.
This private medical conference has been requested by Commander Weitz as the first indication that anyone on board the shuttle is having any health problems. It's scheduled to come up sometime during the next orbit. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
A baby
sickness has been the subject of most of these private medical conferences on past missions, but on this flight, we probably won't know why Challenger's astronauts want to talk to their doctor. That's because NASA has instituted a new policy, making conferences like this between doctor and astronaut a secret, unless, of course, they threaten the mission. That request came late this afternoon from Commander Paul Weitz, but it could mean that any of the 4 shuttle astronauts have developed health problems. If it is space sickness, it could interfere with Bill Peterson and Story Musgrave's spacewalk scheduled for tomorrow. The preparations for that big event begin in earnest about an hour from now, but Musgrave has been fiddling with his spacesuit so much that he's put the preparations way ahead of schedule. Meanwhile, ground technicians are still trying to figure out how they'll try to boost the misfired satellite into its proper orbit. So far, that's been the only disappointment on this maiden voyage of the Shuttle Challenger. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening. I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. The Challenger shuttle and its crew of Weitz, Bobko, Musgrave, and Peterson. And except for that balky satellite, everything seems to be going according to plan. Judy Muller reports from the Johnson Space Center.
It's been a fairly routine day so far for the 4 astronauts aboard the Challenger. And, of course, that's what NASA wants from the shuttle. Routine, or nominal performance, as they say in space jargon. The schedule was taken up with various experiments, but even the routine checkout of systems prompted enthusiasm from the crew. Like this reaction from pilot Bo Bobko as he was testing switches.
With you up first, and then down. Start trip. All right, hot auto brace is on. We'll go to test. Whee! Works anyway.
The mission specialists aboard, Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson, are preparing for tomorrow's EVA, or spacewalk. That preparation includes putting on the bulky spacesuits and pressurizing the airlock. When they actually do leave the cabin tomorrow, there's a chance they'll venture out beyond the cargo bay and take pictures of loose panels on the ship's aft section. Meanwhile, that troubled satellite following an egg-shaped path high over the Challenger's position had more trouble last night. One of the jet thrusters aboard stuck in a closed position, and the TDRS began spinning again. A radio command from the ground stopped the rolling, however, and officials say they still hope to boost the TDRS into its proper orbit. Judy Muller, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
NBC News. Good evening, I'm Gary Nod.
Aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. NASA officials aren't talking about it, except to say that it won't spoil the current mission. The astronauts tonight tried on a couple of spacesuits that are to be used in a spacewalk tomorrow afternoon. They also worked on a variety of other experiments today, including one on space sickness. About half of all space flyers have suffered some degree of nausea from space sickness. Some have also suffered from skin rashes, headaches, and clogged sinuses.
Say the spacesuits are ready. So are Bill Peterson and Story Musgrave, ready to finish the job aborted by faulty spacesuits during the last shuttle flight. If at first NASA doesn't succeed, it tries and flies again. Tonight, the astronauts don their suits and finish their final checks way ahead of schedule. That's mainly because Musgrave has been fiddling around with his spacesuit in his spare time throughout this flight. No surprise, he helped design the shuttle suit. Tomorrow, he gets a chance to test it firsthand. The 2 spacewalking astronauts will use handrails to move down to the rear of the shuttle's cargo bay. They'll find some busy work down there, a board full of nuts, bolts, and other miscellaneous hardware. They'll work with a shuttle toolkit to test the idea of fixing satellites in the cargo bay. They'll work with ropes to partially test an emergency plan for closing the big cargo bay doors. Tonight, Peterson and Musgrave cut their TV cameras on for a televised tour and a sneak preview of what they hope to show us close up tomorrow.
You can see the series of handrails that are yellow colored that go down along each direction on there, man. You got a double barrel blast, one thruster in each path by that time. And you go hand over hand over those handrails that are colored yellow so that the EVA crew can distinguish them from the predominantly white parts of the vehicle.
Tonight, in fact, just a few minutes ago, the astronauts got some good word from technicians about the plans to set straight the big TDRS satellite that went haywire early this week. And the announcement we're about to hear was heard first by the astronauts. They got the word before the press or the public.
Well, first of all, they want to wait till you guys get back here before they do their RCA
RCS thrust and the geosync. That should occur on Sunday, and they've got plenty of RCS fuel on board to do that with, and still have the RCS for a good lifetime of the satellite itself.
The idea is to straighten out the satellite's egg-shaped orbit into a circular one, then kick it up into a geosynchronous orbit where it's supposed to be. Geosynchronous is the orbit that makes satellites appear to be stationary from the Earth. That's the one used by communication satellites, the place where TDRS is supposed to be. And now, on the eve of this scheduled walk in space, Challenger's astronauts have apparently developed some sort of a minor medical trouble. They asked for a private talk with their doctor earlier today. Right now, there's no telling what's wrong with which astronaut. NASA's not going to reveal that, and there's a bit of a controversy about that. We'll cover that about 30 minutes from now on the Night Report. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
At the night period now, resting up for a 3.5-hour spacewalk Thursday afternoon, spacesuits, which caused the spacewalk to be scrubbed on the last Columbia shuttle mission, checked out okay on Wednesday night. Story Musgrave and Don Peterson will make the first American spacewalk in 9 years. This is news from Mutual Radio. Mike McCliskey reporting.
The entire morning aboard the Shuttle Challenger will be taken up with preparation for this afternoon's extravehicular activity, or spacewalk. The 3.5-hour EVA in the open cargo bay of the Challenger will be the first American spacewalk in 9 years and the first from a shuttle. Mission Specialist Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson will be wearing $2 million spacesuits, much lighter, more flexible, and easier to put on than those worn by their predecessors on Apollo flights. Spacesuit expert Jim McBarron says a maneuvering backpack will be introduced soon, which will free the astronauts of the tether that links them to the orbiter.
On the STS-6 mission in April of next year, an astronaut wearing the spacesuit and the manned maneuvering unit will actually fly away from the orbiter to a satellite, which has a problem at the present time, and attach the MMU and himself to it, and fly the satellite back into the cargo bay of the orbiter.
The satellite in question is called the Solar Maximum, which malfunctioned shortly after launch. Today, the spacewalkers will be testing the tools, winches, and ropes that will be used for such future repairs. Judy Muller, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
For Mission Specialist Story Musgrave and Don Peterson, now underway. The wake-up call for the Challenger crew came just minutes ago. In a few hours, the mission specialists in this F-True will begin gearing up for their 3.5-hour spacewalk. Astro will be covering live during the 3 o'clock hour on the Jim Tate Show. There'll also be more work on the planned maneuver to send the misguided TDRS satellite to its proper orbit. The actual move won't begin until Sunday after the astronauts are back. Wayne Dolcefino reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, KTRH News.
Inches of snow in El Paso yesterday. We've heard that report, and of course the weather is staying bad at Northrop all through today. That's supposed to happen in April.
Astronaut Paul Weitz will stay inside today when 2 of his fellow crew members make a spacewalk. So far, the astronauts are ahead of schedule, and the 3.5-hour walk could begin as early as 3:10 Eastern Time this afternoon. This is The World This Morning from Mutual Radio. Frank Gentry reporting.
Shuttle Challenger are busy as beavers this morning, getting set for the spacewalk by 2 of them this afternoon.
NBC News. This is Cameron Swayze reporting. They're leaving by boat in Louisiana. Floodwaters are surging in space a few hours from now. The first American spacewalk in almost a decade. Correspondent Jay Barbry is at Cape Canaveral. Jay, the last time the shuttle astronauts tried to go for the spacewalk, they had some trouble with those $2 million copy space suits. Now, what's been done to prevent more problems?
Well, Cameron, 3 tiny plastic inserts worth less than a nickel each were left out of one of the suits. An assembly line inspector was fired because of his mistake. One of 2 magnetic sensors failed in the other suit, causing a regulator to shut off the fan. An adjustment was made to clamps in the regulator, and so far, Cameron, the suits on board Challenger are working as advertised.
And if they keep working well, they'll be out about 3 hours this afternoon.
Of donning those $2 million spacesuits is underway. The 2 mission specialists aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger are in the airlock now, checking systems and breathing pure oxygen. KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino is at the Johnson Space Center with a live update.
I'd be late for work every day if I had to put on a spacesuit like the one mission specialists Musgrave and Peterson are now putting on. It's certainly more comfortable than the suits they used to use in the last spacewalk taking place during Skylab in '74. But it involves first putting on the liquid-cooled version of the long johns and then attaching the number of the cables that are attached from the suits to the airlock compartment until the 3-hour pre-breathing period is over. That period will begin in about 15 minutes. During that time, nitrogen is slowly purged from the astronauts' blood to prevent the bends. Then the airlock is turned into a vacuum before they take the walk out in space for what should be an exciting show. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. The Senator Musgrave and Donald Peterson are making final preparations for their spacewalk scheduled for this afternoon. The shuttle crewmen will perform exercises in their craft's cargo bay, maneuvers that will test procedures for future space shuttle flights. Among missions foreseen by NASA are flights on which astronauts could leave the shuttle to repair satellites already orbiting in space.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. Charges of...
Right now has nothing to do but hang around and wait, and hanging around is exactly what Don Peterson and Story Musgrave are up to at this moment. They're now in their $2 million spacesuits hanging off of the Challenger's airlock walls, pre-breathing pure oxygen. They're going to have to adapt to that oxygen before they crawl out of the shuttle's hatch about an hour from now. Musgrave and Peterson are so eager to start this stroll in space that they began their pre-breathe about 20 minutes ahead of schedule, around 11:25 this morning. That's probably going to put them ahead of schedule for the walk itself. The spacewalk is now about an hour away, an hour and 1 minute away to be precise, and we'll have live coverage of that spacewalk during the Jim Tate Show about an hour from now. Live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
This is Judy Muller, CBS News, reporting from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. In just about 40 minutes from now, 2 astronauts will step out of an airlock into the open cargo bay of the Challenger. It will be the first American spacewalk in almost a decade. Mission specialists Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson are running right on schedule for the EVA, or spacewalk. For about the past 3 hours, they've been in their spacesuits, suspended from the walls of Challenger's airlock. They've been breathing pure oxygen in an attempt to rid their circulatory systems of nitrogen. This to prevent them from getting the bends once in space. There's not much to do during the pre-breathing phase, but one thing they could do was listen to President Reagan, who just minutes ago called to say good luck.
I can't say I envy you, but we are very proud of all of you. Good luck to you on the rest of your mission, and God bless you.
President Reagan. Judy Muller, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Traffic and sports from 4 to 7 on News Talk 57, WFAA, the information station for Dallas-Fort Worth.
NBC News, I'm Jay Barbry at Cape Canaveral. Astronauts Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson have just stepped into space to begin their 3.5-hour spacewalk. Moments ago, Mission Control gave them the go to step through Challenger's airlock.
Copy, we have a go for deep press on time. That's affirmative. You have a go. You might want to double-check that seal if you didn't already.
The astronauts will move through Shuttle's open cargo bay, stopping here and there to test tools and to attempt working at pre-installed workstations to see how well man can perform normal work tasks in the weightless environment. What they learn will be used next year by the Shuttle 13 crew to repair a disabled scientific satellite already in orbit. Steve Porter will have more news in a minute.
Picking up, hopefully, the signal.
Okay, if you will then, in these 15 seconds, as much as you can, give us an idea as how this works. How does one prepare to walk in space? Do they go into a special chamber and it's...
Their atmosphere is inside the ship is 20% oxygen and 80% nitrogen. They have to breathe pure oxygen, so for 3.5 hours they pre-breathe it inside this locked airlock. Then eventually they depressurize it and create a vacuum.
Go on for about 7.5 minutes.
We now have mission control.
Hatch is open. EV1 is halfway out. They're configuring the airlock. Get ready for Dawn to come out.
Story Musgrave is now outside of the craft.
He couldn't wait.
That's right. He was the first man out, certainly. You'd have to expect that.
We have a suggested setting for the DAC camera now in the sunlight.
Jim, by the way, the shuttle is pointed down toward the Earth. So in a sense, when they come out, their heads will be facing the planet Earth. The shuttle payload bay doors are open and the ship is turned upside down. They don't know that, obviously, but...
So right now, Story Musgrave is sticking halfway out of the top of the space shuttle, which is facing toward the Earth.
Well, there is no up or down.
Hooked on the door here, Connie. You want me just to leave it there? On the hedge? That's the inner hedge. I think it's a fine place to leave it.
You can see they're having problems crawling out of the hatch right now. That's something they had on the Apollo spacewalks. Getting out of that spacecraft is a little bit difficult because if you snag your clothes on it, your clothes could tear. If you tear your clothes in space, you're in big trouble.
Are you getting any pictures down there?
Not yet. We're not expecting any pictures, as a matter of fact. They don't have the capability to pick up TV at every tracking station, so we're expecting TV pictures about 11 minutes from now. So probably we're going to have some pictures, and fairly dramatic pictures too. They've got 4 TV cameras mounted in the payload bay. As a matter of fact, they have a man at mission control who is the director, like a television director. He decides which camera goes on at which time, the Steven Spielberg of space, or whatever you want to call it.
What's the word on that satellite?
The satellite right now, the situation on the satellite is that they're going to have to wait about 2 weeks or so before they're going to fire up those engines. They still claim that it will live for 10 years. We've been hearing conflicting opinions from different people at TRW and in various other places. They say they can get it up there and they can put it in the right place, but it's going to take a lot more time than they expected.
And I wouldn't be surprised, Jim, if 4 or 5 years from now we hear a report that TDRS-6 satellite is coming down early because the fuel numbers just don't simply add up to some of the folks we've talked to. If you have so much fuel on board and you expend a good portion of that fuel, we understand that it could be anywhere up to 60%, expend that kind of fuel to get to another location, then obviously your ability to stay up there for 10 years is questionable. At this point, they're saying that they've got it under control, and I think there's an awful lot of pressure here for TDRS-6 to work. I mean, with the President's defense budget coming up this week, and TDRS is still a primarily military.
That's Don Peterson out now. Both of them are out of the hatch right now.
They're now along the rail.
So I'm looking over my shoulder in here.
Looking over their shoulder down at the Earth right now.
PJ, would you ask me to go?
It must be a beautiful sight.
Before we leave Guam here, we've got 2.5 minutes to go.
They've got 2.5 minutes before they lose contact with the shuttle, voice contact with it.
We're ready to copy.
We have Bruce on the line who would like to join us.
4.3. Okay, press. 831.
Let's get this.
All right, they're taking out some kind of readings of some sort there. It's unusual, the tone of voice, though. That voice we don't recognize. It sounds like someone's talking more slowly than usual or something. That's why it's kind of threw us off there.
The Challenger spacewalk. This is Judy Muller, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Just minutes ago, 2 astronauts opened the airlock hatch of the shuttle and stepped into the open cargo bay.
And Challenger, Houston's with you over Guam for about 7.5 minutes. Roger, hatch is open. EV1 is halfway out. They're configuring the airlock. Get ready for Dawn to come out.
It's the first time Americans have taken a walk in space in almost a decade. The first time ever from a shuttle. Mission specialists Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson have several tasks to perform during this 3.5-hour extravehicular activity, as it's called. Certainly one of the most important, testing new $2 million spacesuits for the first time in space. We'll be back with the Challenger spacewalk in just 1 minute. The first EVA, or spacewalk, was performed by a Soviet cosmonaut in 1965. He was followed that same year by an American, Edward White, on Gemini 4. My colleague Reid Collins, who is monitoring the spacewalk in New York, reported on that first American EVA. Reid, have things changed much since then?
Well, they've gotten a lot more complicated. You now have men in spacesuits that are self-contained. Ed White went out on a tether, and he was supplied oxygen. And he was out there for just 20 minutes outside of Gemini 4. He didn't really want to come back, as most people, I think, recall, within that allotted time. We then were in the days of playing catch-up with the Soviet Union. As you said, Leonov had already done the same thing. The Soviets used at that time the same sort of airlock mechanism going on to pure oxygen as we now have come to do. White didn't have to depressurize or denitrogens his system because they were on pure oxygen in the Gemini spacecraft all the time. Some of the differences, I suppose, were the fact that NASA wanted to keep the Ed White spacewalk a secret until just before it happened. They shipped in the long umbilical cord, the gold-covered cord that would be used for that in secret. And Howard Benedict, the Associated Press writer, discovered it through some of his sources at the Cape. Broke the story that America was, in fact, going to try a spacewalk on Gemini 4. NASA's reason for secrecy then was probably because they were not too fully confident that it might work, getting out the narrow door of a Gemini. First, they said he might just stand up and look around. And then they decided, well, if we're going to look good in the space race, as it was in those days, we'd better let him out. And he did come out. And he made 20 minutes worth of history. That was June of 1965, Judy.
Right, and now it's 1983, and we're just minutes away from hearing from the astronauts. Thank you, Reid. They are what we call acquisition of signal coming up in about 2 minutes, and that means that they will be able to tell Mission Control how the spacewalk is going, just to bring everybody up to date on what's happened in the last 20 minutes or so. First out of the airlock hatch was mission specialist Story Musgrave. And he's the 47-year-old medical doctor who also holds some 5 academic degrees, and he's in such good physical condition, according to his colleagues, that they joke that he could do the spacewalk without a spacesuit. Of course, no one could do that. Space is not a friendly environment. Those suits are designed to protect them from extreme temperatures and the vacuum of the void they're entering. As a matter of fact, the sun delivers 250 degrees of heat, and in the shade, the temperature dips to minus 250, so without those suits, they couldn't survive. Musgrave has now become EV1, and what he should be doing now, we will soon find out, is what they call translating down the starboard side of the cargo bay, the open cargo bay, by attaching himself to a slide wire. EV2 is mission specialist Donald Peterson, and he's translating, or moving, the same way down the port side. And this whole process takes about 15 minutes. And during this time, they should have been testing what they call their tethers, which is the cord that attaches them to the shuttle orbiter. If they didn't have that tether, of course, they'd float off into space. So it's like an umbilical cord to their home base. We are just minutes away from hearing from them, and I'm sure we'll hear from Mission Control now. We are just picking up that signal now. Let's listen for just a minute. Still a little bit static. We are just coming up over a ground tracking station. Eventually, a satellite system is meant to replace this. We are getting television pictures.
Houston, looking over Hawaii for
There you go.
7.5 minutes with a good picture.
And it is a good picture. We can see them. We can see both of them. Beautiful, clear pictures in the open cargo bay. The stark white of the cargo bay, the stark white of the spacesuits against the black void of space. It's hard to tell right now which is which.
If you don't mind. That suits me. Give me a break. Okay, John, we're going to start our air translation.
Okay, we're watching.
Story? Yeah. Close the door on my wrist. Yeah, that can happen open. I think I can reach it. Hold on.
They are carrying out the very activities that I've just been describing. They have translated down the cargo bay, and they are doing various safety tether dynamics.
0309, John.
Reid, can you see these pictures as well as we can?
Yes, Judy, they've made it all the way to New York City. Musgrave has a red band around his right leg, and that should distinguish him, I believe, from Peterson. I think he has a band around both legs, maybe.
Yes, he's got most of the work to do. From what I've seen of the schedule, he's got most of the chores to perform. They were originally thinking about having Musgrave bounce up out of that cargo bay and take pictures of some damaged panels, but it was unclear as to whether that was going to happen or not.
We got a pretty bad ring here, and we're wondering if we can troubleshoot it for us by taking the UHF.
It's always that way. The communications are a little bit dim, a little bit strange.
What they're doing now, I believe, is what we call safety tether dynamics. Both crew members have returned to the forward bulkhead on the port side. And EV1, I believe that's the port side if we're looking the right direction. EV1, Musgrave, will stop about where he is now and evaluate safety tether dynamics. And they're doing all sorts of things with those safety tethers. During this time, somewhere, he's going to perform an exercise aimed at evaluating the reel-in characteristics of his 50-foot-long safety tether. He's going to attach it to a slide wire. They're both attached. I think you can see the slide wires in the picture. He will attach waist links to that wire. He will let his safety tether then pull him toward the starboard side. And then when he's pulled to the center, he's going to evaluate his ability to rotate in his spacesuit by varying tension. Now, what this really is something like a fish being reeled in. It's testing his strength against the tension of the line. They want it, there he is, and you can see him floating midway over the cargo bay, and you can see that if he weren't attached to that umbilical cord, he would certainly not be staying around for long. It always amazes me, these clear pictures that we get from space, and you really feel as if you are there. Several things that Musgrave will be doing as we watch here. He will step into rotating footholds at something they call the workstation. And going through tests to evaluate the mobility of the spacesuit. These spacesuits, by the way, cost $2 million apiece. They're supposed to be lighter, more flexible than the ones you were describing, Reid, earlier, used on Gemini and Apollo flights. But they still look very bulky to me. They've got 9 layers, and they certainly aren't something you go out and dance in.
Judy, it is part of the idea, and it's hard to believe watching those toy-like figures sort of spinning around in their weightlessness in the black, that eventually men plan in those suits to translate, as NASA says, far, far away from a spacecraft and actually go perform work away with the aid of a maneuvering unit. Ed White had a little peroxide-driven unit that helped him to maneuver about.
As a matter of fact, the exercise being carried out today is really a rehearsal for future missions and very real mechanical repair jobs in space. And that first chance could come as early as April of next year, when there's a plan to have astronauts from STS-6 repair the Solar Maximum. That's a satellite which malfunctioned shortly after lunch. And the TEDRA satellite, which has been having trouble from this shuttle, is much too far away, of course, for the astronauts to get to it. And we still see them working away in the shuttle. Look like 2 large white moving mummies. They lose all personal characteristics in those suits. But you certainly pick up on their personalities as they speak back to mission control. The astronauts will complete their spacewalk in a little less than 3 hours, a walk that clears the path for future missions, as we said. It's scheduled to land Saturday at Edwards Air Force Base. For my colleague Reid Collins in New York, I'm Judy Muller, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Space shuttle about another 35 seconds from now.
Right, I'll save my thoughts for then.
It looks really nice, Jim. The Earth does. It looks like there's not much clouds wherever they are, and it certainly isn't over town.
Across the port side, maybe down here. Okay, I'm going across the bottom.
You know, we haven't heard Don Peterson talking very much at all this mission. It's like the first words we've heard from that guy since launch.
That's right. That led to the speculation last night that perhaps he was the one who had the health problems because he wasn't talking very much. But he's doing fine out there, talking by radio with Story Musgrave. We're starting to lose a picture.
Boy, that was great.
cargo bay.
They seem to be maneuvering extremely well, although you heard Musgrave mention that it was a deeper sort of pool, so I imagine it's a lot different than being down deep in water in terms of maneuvering your hands and your feet, but he seems to have a fairly easy time grabbing on the railings along the side of the cargo bay.
And they are tethered to the
That's right. They're definitely tethered, but they want to, obviously, when you're doing it the first time, you want to have your backup. So not only is he tethered, but at least most of the times he's at least got his foot into a restraint, or he's got one of his hands tied to a rail, because you want to have the backup just in case something was to go wrong. But it is amazing, and after the last mission, it's one of those kind of things where until you see it, you don't believe they're going to be able to do it. And real mission. But they've already, I'll tell you something, if they came back in right now, they would have solved their purpose. It's that type of an event, I would think, in that they have shown the integrity of these suits, and that, to me, is the key question.
That's the primary purpose, but of course they want to play around in back there a little bit. They want to work with ropes, for example, to see if they could actually close the cargo bay doors manually if necessary, and that's why they're going to whip out some ropes and work with winches and so on this time, just to figure out if, in an emergency, they could perform these operations in space.
How do you members of the cynical press, and I say that with a smile, I say that with a smile, how do you watch something like this and not get goosebumps?
They've just been down there at the port aft side. We're looking at the estimating directive for the first American spacewalk for 9 years. Beautiful TV pictures. 3 3/4 minutes. The tail of the shuttle. They're about 45 minutes into it. Things are working perfectly. They're tethered to the shuttle. We see one of them upside down and floating in space just above the hinges. They're evaluating their mobility. The other one, Story Musgrave, is floating upside down. And he's attempting to exercise some of the equipment back there. Well, there's a winch against the back wall, the handrail. They're just testing the mobility to see what happens when they grab things, move around. You're listening to the Dial-a-Shuttle. That's good. We don't see Musgrave's back, the backpack is playing on board. The astronauts are tethered. Don't forget, when you get up there, I don't know if you get up high enough, see if you can see what those two lumps are on the outer spot there. They're getting around pretty good up there. They're tethered by a reel. Reel is 60 pounds, 60 feet of tape. We're looking now at the tail of the shuttle. The astronauts are still in the bulkhead, the aft stand of the payload bay, and the Earth is just behind it, the two pods. And now he's up checking the right orbital maneuvering system pod. There were a couple of pieces of turned up installation back there. Gorgeous, gorgeous pictures. Beautiful blue ocean, white fleecy clouds, the white tile of the shuttle, and the even whiter white of the spacesuits of the astronauts. The orange and gold colored coverings of the satellite support mechanism. And we see on their arms the American flag. The last few weeks, we're starting to lose signal. PJ, we'll see, we're astronaut, and we'll see it down at Ascension 3 plus 46, and we might have a star of opportunity. Would you put the star trackers back in the zone or the track mode, please? Oh, yeah, sure will. And, PJ, you have the cameras back. Okay, all right. Challenger. We'll be having about a 25-minute loss of signal period here until we reacquire over the edge of the Ascension Island tracking station range. We'll be home with TV for a while until we come back here, Hawaii and the U.S. again. As we left the coverage of that ground station, Astronaut Musgrave was maneuvering to look over the Olms pod to view the two flaps of surface insulation that appeared to have raised up near the launch phase. Both the crewmen were evaluating the handholds. They had moved to the aft bulkhead. And shortly after checking out the communications from the aft part of the orbiter payload bay, they'll begin the safety tether evaluation. 3 days, 3 hours, 23 minutes mission elapsed time. This is Mission Control, Houston. And the 10.
I'm Douglas Edwards. A couple of astronauts have left the Shuttle Challenger and are walking in space. More on it, what's ahead? Judy Muller tells us about that from the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Musgrave and Peterson have a lot of chores to accomplish during this 3.5-hour walk. One of the main goals of the EVA, as it's called, is to test out those new space suits. They cost $2 million apiece, and they've never had a real test in space. They were supposed to go out on the last shuttle, but that EVA was scrubbed when there were malfunctions in both suits. So, of course, that's the primary goal of this spacewalk. They have other things to do as well. They are moving along the length of the cargo bay, sliding along guide wires, testing their tethers, which are the cables that connect them to the orbiter. They're going to do some simple tests using their new tools and practice winch procedures for manually closing the payload doors. This in case the doors would not shut automatically.
Judy Muller at Mission Control. Now this.
Mutual news. 2 of the astronauts on the shuttle mission are about a quarter way through their spacewalk. Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson are walking around the shuttle's payload bay, checking things out, and prompting this wisecrack from ground control.
Story, while you're back under the hood, why don't you check the oil? I don't see any. That's good.
The spacewalk is the first for American astronauts in 9 years. It's supposed to last about 2.5 more hours. The astronauts are wearing new $2 million spacesuits that are so complex they're virtually miniature spacecrafts.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Thompson. The Senate...
Musgrave and Peterson are working with a winch, a device that gave them a bit of trouble when the rope attached wouldn't come loose, at least for a while.
Okay, I got it. I yanked it off the roller. Good work. Good work.
The winch is an important tool. If doors ever fail to close on a future mission, the astronauts could use the winch to close them, or to free a satellite, or to change the angle of the tilt table that once held the IUS rocket. If those cargo bay doors do not close, a shuttle cannot return to Earth. So the winch exercise is an important rehearsal for what could be a life-saving situation one day. And the astronauts reported a while ago that the new $2 million spacesuits are working just fine. Judy Muller at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Space Shuttle astronaut Story Musgrave as he and Donald Peterson stepped out of the Challenger's airlock a couple of hours ago for a 3-hour spacewalk in the shuttle's cargo bay. They'll be out there another 45 minutes or so.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. Americans are walking in space tonight for the first time in almost 10 years, and they've had a presidential send-off from the White House. Judy Muller reports from the Johnson Space Center.
For the first time, American astronauts are taking a walk in space from a shuttle orbiter. Mission specialists Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson left the airlock in their $2 million spacesuits late this afternoon and stepped into the open cargo bay of the Challenger. Before they left the safety of the spacecraft, they heard from President Reagan.
Yes, am I talking to the Space Shuttle Challenger?
Yes, sir, you certainly are.
Well, listen, first of all, congratulations on the continued success of your mission.
The two are still out there, testing out their tethers that link them to the shuttle and the spacesuits, working with the tools that will one day be used to repair satellites in orbit. And they're having fun as well. Musgrave nearly swung himself over the side of the ship doing a handstand. Mission Control asked him how the real thing compared with his training in a large swimming pool on Earth.
Got a good shot of Mother Earth behind you there, Story. A little deeper pool, and I've been used to working in.
Judy Muller, CBS News, at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
We're looking at the astronauts down from a camera on the forward starboard side of the payload bay. Don Peterson, half in and half out of the airlock hatch. Now we see them from the other end of the payload bay. Two windows, flight deck. Oh, beautiful picture of Don Peterson half in the hatch, watching Story Musgrave in the toolbox, throwing away tools. Everything's fine on the TVA. They've been out there 3 hours, 48 minutes, and 10 seconds. Can you run down and see Kilauea? It's supposedly really putting on a show now. Just said the Kilauea volcano. But it's pretty cloudy over the islands as they're coming down here. Kilauea volcano on the island of Hawaii is putting on a show. They are. Jay, we turned off camera Charlie. We're going to the overtime. Okay, thank you. One of the cameras got overheated. Yeah, Hawaii. Just like it was yesterday. You can tell where the island is by the clouds, the shape of the island of Hawaii. I don't know if they're going to pan up to show us those islands or not. We saw them yesterday in a pass. I'm not quite sure what astronaut Musgrave is doing. It looks like he's beating his helmet against the side of the wall, but I'm sure that's not right. Or he may be trying to tighten the bolt. We got about 2.5 more minutes to go. Okay, guys. What do we got left to do out here? They look clean. Nice, George. They are secured down by their feet by foot restraints. He's now pulling his feet out of those foot restraints, floating free, holding by his hand on the handrail, turning around toward the airlock hatch. A minute and 53 seconds left in the communication pass. The last one. Unfortunately, this orbit, Musgrave's completed closing up the toolbox and all the items appear to be stored away. High. I'll stay down low. This orbit will not bring them back over communications range until they get over to South Africa. So they'll be buttoning up the hatch. Peterson is in the airlock. Musgrave is sort of diving backwards into it. He's almost out of sight. Good picture of Musgrave going back in, completing America's first spacewalk in 9 years. And the first of the Shuttle Program. He'll be attaching his wrist to the outside. Less than a minute now of communication. And the other one. And Challenger, go here to Hawaii. We see you in, Chris. Don't forget to double check those seals for us. We'll see you down in Santiago at 6:44. That's about, Hawaii station now. We saw astronauts Musgrave and Peterson getting back into the airlock, preparing to repressurize, and that'll take a little time. Thus completing the shuttle spacewalk, first one of the Space Shuttle Program. Walk that lasted nearly 4 hours.
You're listening to Dial-a-Shuttle, a program.
Had plenty of margin left in their consumables, the power and the oxygen, all the life support systems in their backpacks, and had completed all the tasks outlined for them in the EVA checklist, and are now back in the airlock. That's 3 days, 6 hours, 26 minutes mission elapsed time. This is Mission Control, Houston.
CBS News, I'm Stephanie Shelton. Astronauts Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson are back in the Challenger's lock. They're nearly 4 hours spacewalk over. It went so smoothly that when the two men asked for a little more time to complete their work in the shuttle's open cargo bay, NASA said okay. But as it turned out, Musgrave and Peterson apparently didn't need much of the extra half hour they were allotted. At no time were the men actually separated from the Challenger. They were tethered by a kind of leash that did not seem to impede their maneuverability. And those pesky spacesuits that failed 5 months ago in their debut worked just fine today for the first American spacewalk in 9 years. More news in a minute.
Been hard work, but here on the ground it sounded like fun. Story Musgrave and Don Peterson crawled around Challenger's payload bay for nearly 4 hours. The white and gold of the shuttle bay and the blue and the white swirls of the Earth gave a dramatic background for the view of the astronauts crawling along the side of the shuttle. It was mostly business, except for occasional joking exchanges like this one.
Boy, while you're back under the hood, why don't you check the oil? I don't see anything. That's good.
NASA gave the okay for the spacewalk to continue past its 3.5-hour schedule. The astronauts took advantage of that. They stayed out about an extra 30 minutes, crawled back in about 15 minutes ago. Now they've apparently proven that shuttle astronauts can indeed work on the outside of their craft using ropes to close their doors or lower stuck satellite ramps if they need to. But more than anything else, they've proven that the $2.5 million spacesuits work, at least for the first spacewalk of this shuttle era. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
log now. 2.9 pounds. Brief moment where one of the vents, one of the valves was not totally closed to the outside. Pressure's up to 4 pounds now. They're ending the first shuttle spacewalk after about 4¼ hours, bringing the pressure up in the airlock, about 5 pounds per square inch now. And we are 3 days, 6 hours, 48 minutes, and 25 seconds into the We have lost the signal now with the Santiago tracking station. Expect to hear a summary statement from Mission Control. This is National Mission Control, Houston, 3 days, 6 hours, 49 minutes mission elapsed time. The astronauts repressurizing the airlock. Had a period of time where the pressure did not appear to be holding in the airlock. Checked the equalization valves and determined that one of them was not completely closed. Closed that valve and the airlock is holding pressure. Brought it up to 5 psi to check and make sure that it is remaining steady. And after a period of time where they feel confident that it is holding, then they will bring it back up to equalize with cabin pressure. We're about 17 minutes away from picking up the spacecraft again over Botswana. We may or may not have communication at that time if they have switched back to normal communication configuration from their way they were set up during the EVA. Do not yet have an official time for the ending of the EVA. It actually ends when they go back off of EMU power and are hooked up to the orbiter again. We should be able to pick that up sometime soon from the crew. The time for the beginning of the spacewalk was at 3 days, 2 hours, and 33 minutes mission elapsed time, which is counted from the time that the crew members go on the EMU power rather than orbiter power. This is Mission Control, Houston. And this is the Dial-a-Shuttle program from the National Space Institute.
CBS News, I'm Jay Jones. It's called a spacewalk, but the two astronauts who entered the open cargo bay of the orbiting Shuttle Challenger today actually floated, glided, tumbled, and bounced. David Dow has the story.
Storied yesterday when Brian Peterson not only completed the spacewalk, they stayed a little longer than their scheduled 3.5 hours in Challenger's payload bay, completing all the tests assigned to them. Almost immediately, though, they encountered a stubborn cargo winch. It was stuck and finally unstuck by Musgrave.
Okay, we go.
alarm went off in Peterson's spacesuit, which could indicate a possible oxygen leak. But none could be immediately detected. And toward the end of his stroll in space, most of the work done, Peterson reclined for a look at Hawaii, drifting by just 176 miles below him.
A little patch of looks like shallow water out there, almost dead astern. It's light green in the midst of all that blue. Yeah, that's a little patch of shallow water. Okay.
Finally, it was time to pack up the toolbox and go home. Americans had walked into space and returned for the first time in almost a decade. David Dow, CBS News, Houston.